let's get started. So I'm going to mute everybody as we begin the recording. Just a moment. Okay. And I know I often ask, how many people have heard this song or how many people have seen the musical. I know that most of you have not seen Hamilton, and I assume most people don't have the Disney Plus subscription. Although I keep advocating for, they should give me a cut, because I keep advocating for this. Like buy it for the month, watch Hamilton 5 times, it's worth it, and then sign off. So we're going to be looking at really one of the very emblematic songs of Hamilton, both in terms of the masterful lyrics and structure of the song, and also we're finally really in a song that is the genre, that is this sort of, I don't know, hip hop and R&B is in there, and soul, these genres that as we've been saying, Hamilton was the first to bring so fully onto the Broadway stage. So I've eased us into it slowly, but essentially the character Angelica is going to be rapping, but she does it in such a gentle way. I've never been a fan of rap music. I've come to appreciate and respect it more and more over the years. It's a culture like any other. So if you're not accustomed to hearing, for example, Scottish music or Eastern music, Chinese music, your ear may not be accustomed to it, but it doesn't make it any less brilliant or skillful. And that certainly is the case here in this song. So I'll bring you up to date on where we are in the plot. We will listen to, we'll watch a couple of clips because of the limited way that this video is available freely on the internet. We're going to be watching a couple of clips sort of piecemeal, and then we'll listen to the whole song. But this is, we've been introduced to Alexander Hamilton, this young upstart, this relentless, right? We talked about last week, he was young and restless and scrappy like his country, right? Just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. We didn't listen to that particular song, but that's the Alexander Hamilton we see. And he and his friends, there's sort of this posse, this group of the boys who come, the soldier boys coming, they're supporting the revolution, but also they're young men, and they're coming and flirting with all the girls. And the Schuyler sisters are these 3 sisters who are clearly upper class, and they meet. And the song Satisfied is sung by the eldest, Angelica. Angelica Schuyler falls immediately for Alexander Hamilton. There's only one problem. Her sister Eliza also falls for him. And Eliza, of course, ends up marrying Alexander. But here we get to see that it was Angelica who maneuvered the whole thing. Angelica could have got him, but she looks over and she sees that her younger sister, and Eliza is the middle of the 3 sisters, her sister Eliza is smitten. And there's a beautiful moment of generosity where Angelica introduces Hamilton to her sister, and that's it. She lets go of her love, of her dream, of this man that she feels is his match in so many ways. And that's not to say that he's unhappy with Eliza. In fact, they have a wonderful relationship. They go through a rocky part, and then we'll get to that actually at another time, talking about how they repair. But this story of the sisters, 2 sisters going for the same man, I mean, how could it be more obvious which tourist store we're going to be connecting it to? It's going to be Rachel and Leah, the 2 sisters who both marry Jacob. Of course, the main difference is that in the days of polygamy, right, the biblical days, they both get to marry Jacob. Here, he marries Eliza, so that's it. So Angelica needs to remain, unsatisfied for the rest of her life. Before we play this song, Satisfied, I wanted to play you just about a minute of the previous song. The previous song, which is called Helpless, is the scene where we see that party, the ball where they're going to meet. And the song actually goes through the entire courtship and wedding of Eliza with Alexander. And this song, I was reading that it was based on some Beyonce song. Like, I'm really not the right person for this genre, but it really feels like that soulful, R&B pop kind of song. And the reason I want to play it for you is because Helpless is the scene where they fall in love and they get married. And then Satisfied is the song where there's a rewind and a replay. And I mean, raise your hand if you have seen this scene. It's remarkable, isn't it? There's a replay of the same scene, but this time from Angelica's perspective, and you see how she arranged for them to meet. And it's heartbreaking and it's brilliant. So let's just and the reason I want you to hear a few, about a minute of Helpless is because that refrain, helpless, is going to show up in Satisfied, in the song Satisfied. So first, here's Helpless. I'm going to make sure I'm sharing my sound. Just a moment. Okay. And the refrain, helpless, right? Obviously, it's how Eliza's feeling when she's falling head over heels for Alexander. But there's also, she keeps going, I do, which kind of sounds like a doo-woppy sort of I do thing. It also is I do, right? The whole thing leads to the I do of their wedding. So here's the song Helpless. And again, we're not watching it right now, we're just listening.
We were at a revel with some rebels on a hot night, laughing at my sister as she's dazzling the room. Then you walked in and my heart went boom, trying to catch your eye from the side of the ballroom. Everybody's dancing in the band's top volume. Grind to the rhythm as we wine and dine. Grab my sister and whisper, yo, this one's mine. My sister made her way across the room to you, and I got nervous thinking, what's she gonna do? She grabs you by the arm, I'm thinking I'm through. Then you look back at me and suddenly I'm helpless. Oh, look at those eyes, oh, yeah, I'm helpless. Down for the count and I'm drowning and I'm helpless. I'm so into you. Look into your eyes, so into you. I'm helpless. I know I'm down for the count and I'm drowning and I'm.
Where are you taking me?
I'm about to change your life.
Then by all means, lead the way.
Elizabeth Schuyler, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Schuyler,
My sister. Thank you for all your service.
if it takes fighting a war for us to meet, it will have been worth it.
I'll leave you to it.
Okay, we're going to stop there. So I wanted to play that because you hear the scene. The scene that happens is Angelica, the elder sister, introduces Eliza, the second sister, to Alexander. And that same dialogue is now going to show up in the next song. But you see that Angelica really wanted Alexander and gave him up. So now I'm going to do something a little bit unusual. I want, for people who haven't seen the visual of this, I want you to have a chance to see it. So unfortunately, what's available again publicly is very limited, but I found a YouTube video that shows you the first 50 seconds or so of the song, and then another video that showed you the next 50 seconds or so. We're not going to watch the whole song on video because it's simply not available publicly. But what you'll see is the song Satisfied begins at the wedding, right? This is the wedding, and introducing the maid of honor, Angelica Schuyler, and she gives a toast to the groom, to the bride. And then there's a moment where there's a rewind, and you see the cast swirling around and literally backing up. And she then replays the night that she had met Alexander. And she replays it in this song, Satisfied, saying, I will never be satisfied. And yes, thank you for the comments. So the reasons she gave him up, are going to be enumerated in this song. Some of it is because, yeah, she needed to marry. She's the eldest and wittiest and the gossip in New York City is insidious. You're going to see those lines. But also, she sees that her sister Eliza is helpless, right? Is helplessly in love. So there's an act of generosity, there's an act of realism. We can kind of unpack that. And yes, thank you for articulating it, Anita. So the scene is rewound to see the scene again from Angelica's perspective. So again, we're going to watch a video of the beginning of the song, and then we'll watch a video of the next stage of the song, and then we'll stop and listen to the whole song. It's actually a rather lengthy song. That's why, as I said at the beginning, I'm a little concerned we're going to just hang out with Hamilton the whole time. But we'll get to the Torah, I promise, I promise. Okay.
All right, that's what I'm talking about! Now everyone give it up for the maid of honor, Angelica Schuyler!
A toast to the groom,
To the groom, to the groom, to the groom,
to the bride,
to the bride.
from your sister, who's always by your side, to your union,
To the revolution!
and the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied. I remember that night, I just might regret that night for the rest of my day.
Okay. So that's the rewind moment. You see the way the staging, the lights, the acting, the choreography is bringing us backwards in time. And it brings us backwards now to her saying, I remember that night. I remember that night. I just might regret that night for the rest of my days. And so here's the next part of the song. And again, watch the whole song in a moment. I mean, we'll listen to the whole song in a moment, but here's what she's saying. Again, just another few minutes.
I remember that dream like candlelight, like a dream that you can't quite place. But Alexander, I'll never forget the first time I saw your face. I have never been the same. Intelligent eyes in a hunger pang frame. And when you said hi, I forgot my dang name. Set my heart aflame, every part aflame. This is not a game.
Strike me as a woman who has never been satisfied.
I'm sure I don't know what you mean. You forget yourself.
You're like me, I'm never satisfied.
Is that right?
I've never been satisfied.
My name is Angelica Schuyler.
Alexander Hamilton,
Where's your family from?
unimportant, there's a million things I haven't done. But just you wait, just you wait.
Stop, stop, stop.
Okay. By the way, I should mention the refrain of Alexander Hamilton, which comes from the top of the show, where we first are introduced to him, right? Alexander Hamilton, my name is Alexander Hamilton. So every time he's introducing himself to someone, you hear that. And the other thing that you can notice in this song is the way she's toasting to the groom, to the bride, to their union, and they say, the union, to the revolution. And it's a little bit of a, there's a comic relief in the way these guys are his buddies, his friends, his boy pals. Even in the way that John Lawrence at the opening, right? That's his best friend saying, "Hey, everybody, all right, like you're at a party." So it's a very modern. It's as Lin-Manuel Miranda said, it's America as it was then being told by America as it is now. Okay, so what I've found for us now to listen to the full song is a lyric video. So the words are going to go by so quickly that we're going to watch them on the screen as they go by. And it's a lengthy song. It's a good 5-minute song. It takes us through, as we said, the entire scene where they've met. But this time we're replaying the dialogue that we already saw in the previous song, but we understand it differently because we understand that Angelica has given up what she wants for her sister. So here we go. This is Satisfied with lyrics. And then I promise we'll get to the Torah. I find this such a beautiful and tragic song and really done brilliantly. What this lyric video does as well, you'll notice, is it color coats. So it shows you like Angelica will always be in pink or something, and Alexander's lines are in red. So it helps you keep track of sort of what's going on, but still the words go by super quickly. Here we are. Wait, I'm not sure if I shared it with the optimizing for video. Give me a moment. I want to make sure that setting is correct. Yes.
All right. That's what I'm talking about. Now, everyone, give it up for the maid of honor, Angelica Schuyler.
A toast to the groom,
To the groom, to the groom, to the groom,
to the bride,
to the bride.
from your sister,
Angelica, Angelica.
who's always by your side, to your union,
To the revolution.
and the hope that you provide. May you always be satisfied. I remember that night, I just might regret that night for the rest of my days. I remember those soldier boys tripping over themselves to win our praise. I remember that dream like candlelight, like a dream that you can't quite place. But Alexander, I'll never forget the first time I saw your face. I have never been the same. Intelligent eyes in a hunger pang frame. And when you said hi, I forgot my dang name. Set my heart aflame, every part aflame. This is not a game.
You strike me as a woman who has never been satisfied.
I'm sure I don't know what you mean. You forget yourself.
You're like me, I'm never satisfied.
Is that right?
I've never been satisfied.
My name is Angelica Schuyler.
Alexander Hamilton,
Where's your family from?
unimportant, there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait, just you wait.
So this is what it feels like to match wits with someone at your level. What the hell is the catch? It's the feeling of freedom, of seeing the light. It's Ben Franklin with the key and a kite. You see it right? The conversation lasted 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Everything we said in total agreement. It's a 3 minutes, a bit of a dance, a bit of a posture, it's a bit of a stance. He's a bit of a flirt, but I'ma give it a chance. I asked about his family, did you see his answer? His hands started fidgeting, he looked askance. He's penniless, he's flying by the seat of his pants. Handsome boy, does he know it? Peach fuzz, then he can't even grow it. I wanna take him far away from this place, then I turn and see my sister's face, and she is helpless. And I know she is helpless. And her eyes are just helpless. And I realize 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time.
Where are you taking me?
I'm about to change your life.
Then by all means, lead the way.
Number 1.
I'm a girl in a world in which my only job is to marry rich. My father has no son, so I'm the one who has to social climb the one. So I'm the oldest and the wittiest, and the gossip in New York City is insidious. And Alexander is penniless. That doesn't mean I want him any less. Elizabeth Schuyler, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Schuyler,
My sister.
Number 2.
He's after me, cause I'm a Scottish sister that elevates a status side. Have to be naive to set that aside. Maybe that is why I introduce him to Eliza. Now that's his bride. Nice going, Angelica, he was right. You will never be satisfied. Thank you for all your service.
if it takes fighting a war for us to meet, it will have been worth it.
I'll leave you to it.
Number 3.
I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. If I tell her that I love him, she'd be silently resign. He'd be mine. She would say I'm fine. She'd be lying. But fantasize at night, it's Alexander's eyes as I romanticize what might have been if I hadn't sized him up so quickly. At least, my dear Eliza's his wife. At least I keep his eyes in my life. To the groom, to the bride, from your sister, who's always by your side, to your union, and the hope that you provide.
Hello.
She'll be happy as his bride, and I know he will never be satisfied. I will never be satisfied.
So there's that song. Wow. The first time I listened, this was a few years ago when I listened through the soundtrack, and of course I didn't see it on Disney Plus until years later. This was the song that after this I had to turn it off because it just broke my heart, and it was so emotional to think about what this woman has gone through, how she's given up her deepest desire for his sister, the bonds between the sisters, the generosity, the heartbreak. I mean, oof, it's pretty intense. We are going to look at the lyrics before we go to our text, simply because they went by so quickly. Did you catch that? We're going to spend a few minutes just with the moment where she explains why. I know, Pepita, you were mentioning this, but let's look at it in the lyrics. And she explains, as she says, 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time. Why does she know that she needs to give Alexander up for Eliza? Here we go. So she realizes, I'm on the right-hand side of this page, 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time. That gets interrupted by the scene where we see that she introduces him to Eliza. But here then we resume number 1. I'm a girl in a world in which my only job is to marry rich. My father has no son, so I'm the one who has to social climb for one. So she's bound by social conventions. She's bound by being the eldest, by the expectations of the rules and the social climbing, the gossip in New York City. And Alexander is penniless, right? I can't marry this guy. I'm the eldest. I have a position to uphold. So Alexander is penniless. It goes to the next page here. That doesn't mean I want him any less, okay? And then we see them meet. Number 2, she realizes, oh, he only wants me because I'm the Schuyler sister. That elevates his status. I'd have to be naive to set that aside. So maybe there's a moment of, I don't want this penniless guy. So he only wants me because of my last name. So that's why she passed him along. And number 3, this is really the part that I find very beautiful. I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. If I tell her that I love him, she'd be silently resigned. He'd be mine. I'm going up to the top of the page. She'd say I'm fine. She'd be lying. In other words, my sister should get what she wants. I don't want to hold this from her. That's the act of generosity. So it's an act of social convention. It's an act of generosity at the same time, and maybe a little bit an act of I don't know, sort of a snarky, like, huh, you want me just because I'm a Schuyler sister. And she's complex, right? She's the most complex character. When we move over now to the story of Rachel and Leah, there are many parallels, there are many differences, but again, my purpose in our studies here has always been to elucidate some new side of this story that we maybe hadn't seen before. And given what we've seen now in terms of the social conventions, the expectations, And yes, thank you for the comment, the snobbery maybe, and the words being color coded did help. Um, I heard, by the way, Angelica's character Renee, I'm blanking on her last name, say that that was the hardest. That was the hardest rap in the show. That and David Diggs doing the rap Guns and Ships.
Yes, it's when he comes back as
what's his name?
Jefferson. Yes.
No, it's before Jefferson.
Oh
It's
no, when
Lafayette.
he's
It's
Rambo.
Lafayette.
Yes.
I'm taking this horse by the reins, making those red and blood stain. Okay, I'm gonna get carried away by another song. Here we are. And thank you, Anita, for your ongoing commentary, your Broadway commentary in the chat. So we are promised we're getting to the Torah now. Here we are. We are not going to spend time on where they meet. In this story, oddly enough, Rachel is the younger, Rachel is the beloved. So the parallel, in this parallel, I guess that's Angelica. And Rachel is the one who gives her beloved over to her older sister, to Leah. But in the plain text of the story, actually, Rachel and Leah are completely passive. It is their father, Lavan, who does the switch, right? The bride switch. So they greet. We know Lavan is a little bit of a sleaze, but he says, "Oh, come, stay with us. You are bone of my, you are bone and my bone and flesh. I'm sorry, you are." They're cousins, right? They're relatives. And here in verse 16, we hear that Lavan had not only Rachel but also Leah. The name of the older one was Leah. The name of the younger one was Rachel. In the Hebrew, I'm over here. You can see if I'm pointing. Ule Lavan shte banot, shem hagdola Leah, v'shem haktana Rachel. The youngest was Rachel. The oldest was Leah. Ve'enei Leah rakot. Leah had weak eyes, is the translation here. It could be, according to the Midrash, that she was crying. She had reddened eyes, or she had sort of condition in her eyes. The Midrash says the reason she was crying was because of social conventions. She was the elder, and she assumed she was going to be asked to marry Asab, who was the elder, and she was crying about that. That's a Midrash. It's not here in the text, but somehow Leah is contrasted with Rachel, who was Yafat Toar v'Yafat Mar'eh, very beautiful. And Yaakov loves Rachel. Vaye'ehav Yaakov et Rachel. So we saw that already, but now he's going to take it to the next step. Vayomer e'evadcha shava shanim berachel bitcha haktana. I will serve you, I'll work for you for 7 years so that I can marry your younger daughter, Rachel. He's very clear about which daughter he wants. We have the name, we have that's the younger one. And Lavan, the sleaze, says, okay, better I give her to you than to some other foreign guy. Remember, in those days, it was better to marry within the family because at least then the family wealth will stay within the family. And the family identity, of course, in Bereishit is very significant in terms of the covenant. So I'm just skipping ahead, verse 20. Vaya'avod Yaakov berachel sheva shanim. Jacob worked for the right to marry Rachel for 7 years. And this is probably the most, if not the only truly romantic moment in the whole Torah. Vayihiyu be'einav kiyamim achadim. Those 7 years felt like just a few days. Be'ahavato ota. Because he loved him so much. He loved her so much. And at the end of those 7 years, even though maybe they felt like a few days, it was 7 years, Jacob says to Lavan, okay, give me my wife. Hava et ishti ki mal'u yamai. These days have been fulfilled. Va'avoa eleha. I want to be with her. Verse 22, Vaye'esof Lavan et kol anshe hamakom. So he gathers all the guests together, everyone in town. Vaya'as mishteh. He makes this party. And this is going to be the wedding party. Verse 23, Vayehi ba'erev, in the evening, Vayikach et Leah bito, Vayave ota elav. He brought Leah to the chuppah instead of Rachel. Vayavo eleha, he cohabited with her. They were together. And by the way, he also got a maidservant for Leah. She is Zilpah. That's sort of an aside. And then verse 25, sort of the most unbelievable moment of this. Vayehi baboker, the next morning, vehinehi Leah. It was Leah. Surprise, surprise. So all night he didn't realize he wasn't sleeping next to Rachel. This sounds very suspicious. Vayomer el Lavan, he's shocked. He says to the father, Lavan, Ma zot asita li? What have you done to me? Halo berachel avareti imach. I worked for you for Rachel. The lama rimitani, how could you trick me? How could you deceive me? Verse 26, Lavan has an answer. It's not a very nice answer. He says, this is the way. This is how it's done here. Vayomer Lavan, lo ye'asechein bimkomeinu. We don't do things this way in our place, the practice in our place. Latet hatzeira lifnei habechira. Social conventions or expectations of our culture here just don't permit us to put the younger before the elder. Of course, this is a little rib toward Jacob, because what did he just do? He took the blessing of the elder, right? He tricked his father. He dressed up like his older brother Esav. He got the Bechorah, the elder blessing, and then he ran away, and look what happens. The trickery came back to bite him. And it seems probably Lavan heard about what he did and says, I'm not going to be like you. So instead, verse 27, you know what? Let's wait for the Sheva Brachot, for the week of the bridal parties, for the bridal week to be complete. And then you can have Gam et Zot, this one too. Rachel too. And give me another 7 years of work. So actually, contrary to the way that we tell this story colloquially, it's not that he waited another 7 years and then got to marry Rachel. Wait the full week, sort of that's the completion of this wedding feast. He can marry Rachel, but then you're owing me another 7 years. So it's still pretty bad, but he's not waiting to the end of those 7 years for the next wedding. And so he did, and he got Rachel. And so again, Angelica doesn't get to marry her beloved Alexander, but here, both of them, there's still a love triangle. They both get to marry Jacob, but the jealousy and the sort of complexity of the intermingling of this love affair continues. So it's very clear from the start that Rachel is the beloved one, that Leah was not desired, that Leah only, is married by mistake to Jacob. And we'll get in a second to this question of like, how did that happen? We're going to get to that in Midrash. But I just want to show you how it plays out in the rest of this family relationship. It's pretty terrible. I'm just going to give it a minute as I scroll. I know it gets a little blurry. So it's very clear. Oh, I need to even it out so we can see the Hebrew and the English at the same time. Verse 30, he comes as well to Rachel. He loved Rachel more than Leah. Vayehav gam et Rachel mileah, even more than. Vaya'avodi ba'od sheva shanim. So she's the beloved. And because of that, or connected to Leah's feeling rejected, verse 31, Vayar Hashem kisnu Leah. God saw that Leah was, it says, unloved or hated. There's this ongoing trope in the Torah about, when there are multiple wives, it could be that one is more beloved than the other or the others. But snu'ah doesn't necessarily mean hatred. It means unfavored one, and can go into how that comes to play. But I think this translation of unloved is better than snu'ah, which we usually think in Hebrew as hatred. So because she's the not beloved one, vayivtach et rachma, God gave her maybe not love, but gave her babies. And Rachel akara, Rachel is barren. Now, in many ways, the barren woman is also the chosen woman, right? If Rachel is barren, it immediately makes us think of who? The previous matriarchs. It makes us think of Rebecca, who was also barren. It makes us think of Sarah, who was barren. So Rachel is the tzaddiket here, right? The lofty, righteous, beloved one, the one that we really feel is going to continue the covenantal bonds, just like Sarah and Rivka. But here, this is about the relationship. And she is beloved, but Leah brings the children. And we get this litany of babies being born. beginning in verse 32. Leah has a son, Vatahar Leah Vateled ben, Vatikra Shemo Reuven. The entire story of these children's births is all about the competition between these women. She names her son, look, a child, Reuven. And she says, what's more, this is verse 32. Ki amra ki ra'a Hashem be'oni. God has seen my misery. Ki ataya ehavani ishi. Maybe now my husband will love me. And again, the next one is born, and she says, Ki shama Hashem ki snua anochi. God hears that I am unloved, and God gave me also this son. So she calls him Shimon. Vatahar od vateleben. The next one also, Levi, because maybe now my husband will be connected with me. Truly, I have borne him 3 sons. And finally, with Yehuda, she feels praise and thanks. It's the first time, the Midrash says, it's the first time she feels true gratitude, because she knew there were 4 women, 4 wives. So she thought, well, we're all going to have the same number, 4, wives, and they're going to be 12 tribes. I guess we're each going to have 3. This is obviously a prophecy, a midrashic prophecy. So she assumes she's going to have 3. When she has a 4th, she feels her cup runneth over, so to speak. Like, oh wow, now I really feel gratitude. It's not a great dynamic. The competition never ceases. We're going to pick that up in a moment in the next chapter. But I want to draw out this wedding scene. Very much like the scene that we just watched in Satisfied. It should have been mine, but I give him to my sister instead. The Midrash is clearly troubled by this bridal switch. How could it have happened? Okay, it's one thing, maybe, under the veil might have been thick, but a whole day, a whole night. And Rashi quotes the Midrash that says, why did it take until the next morning in daylight for him to realize it was Leah? Maybe she didn't speak much, but also at the night he didn't realize that it was Leah because of her sister's generosity. Lefisha masar Yaakov simanim lerachel. Jacob and Rachel had made up certain secret signs. They obviously knew that the dad was a trickster and might substitute Leah. And so they had made up secret signs which could always recognize it was one another. Ukeshera ata Rachel, when she sees, there's that moment, and I love it. You see it in the scene where, and in the song you hear it, she says, I look over to my sister and I see that she is, that's where it cuts to helpless, right? She's in love, or she's now the one who's going to be marrying this guy. And when they see this, the sister sees this, she says, this is going to be shameful for my sister. So she gave masra limsor, to give over these signs, and that was how she facilitated Leah marrying Jacob. There are some important differences between these stories, right? I know I love drawing these connections. Oh, it's just like Hamilton, it's just like Angelica and Eliza, but it's not. Who holds the true power here in this biblical story? It's the father. It's not the women. It's Lavan. And the women know it's a fait accompli. Rachel knows it's not going to be hers. And so all she's doing is sparing her sister some embarrassment and sparing maybe a scene. But she did not make that decision, whereas Angelica is the one who's in control. Angelica is in control of the whole scene, and she facilitates the union. The other thing that shifts considerably is the dynamic, or that's different, considerably different, is the dynamic between the sisters. There is a moment of generosity here from Rachel toward Leah, but for most of the story, as it continues, which we're going to see in a moment, there is competition. There's not caring. And And Leah never quite feels like she's can measure up to her co-wife, to Rachel. I just can't resist saying this. Um, polygamy was outlawed around the year 1000 with what's called Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershom. So it was accepted widely in the Jewish community that we no longer halachically permit polygamy. It traveled more slowly to the Sephardic community, actually. Interestingly, that's another conversation. But even in Talmudic times, when polygamy was still a possibility, a reality, halachically permitted, the Hebrew word for your co-wife is tsarata, tsara, your distresser, your I don't know a better tsar. It comes from the word pain, distress. The woman who causes you pain, that's your co-wife. There's an assumption that that is not going to be an easy relationship. It's like worse than in-laws, it's your co-wife. And here we see that played out very much throughout the story. And it comes in later with the story of Hannah and Penina, right? One wife is tormenting the other for not having children, and she has children. So in verse 30, Rachel sees that, I'm sorry, chapter 30, verse 1, Rachel sees that she has no children. She is jealous. Vatikane Rachel ba'achota. It's ironic because Leah is jealous of Rachel for the love that Jacob shows her, but Rachel is jealous of Leah. And we're not going to have time to go through every word here. There's a problem, honestly, with the relationship with Rachel to Yaakov, to Jacob. She's clearly struggling with her infertility, and Jacob is not sensitive. Like, what am I, God? It's not my problem. I have 3 other wives who have children. Actually, he doesn't have all 3 yet. This is the moment where she says, okay, I'll give you Bilhah. So maybe you'll have children with her, in my name. So we're going to go through all of this. And even in naming Bilhah's child, God has vindicated me. Verse 6, he has heeded my plea and given me a son. That's where the word Dan is related to. And then the second son that Bilhah has, Rachel says, a fateful contest I waged with my sister, and yet I have prevailed. So I'm maybe I'm winning, maybe because I'm having children now too. And Leah, then competition, right? Leah hasn't had any more babies. I'm going to give him Zilpah, let him have babies with Zilpah. Wow, I have now God, what luck, and I have what fortune, I have Asher. Now this story, this is definitely one of those that we skip in Hebrew schools, but it again, the question of who holds the power is really interesting here. The story of the wedding clearly shows that Lavan, the father, holds the power. But here now, the women's competition shows us that they're the ones with the power in the relationship. Yaakov in all of this is a pawn. So one time, verse 14, during the time of the harvest, Reuven, the eldest, Leah's son, comes upon some mandrakes. Mandrakes in Hebrew, dudaim, these are fertility drugs. These are ancient fertility herbs of some sort. And he brings them to his mother Leah. Even the children know, like, fertility is what this competition is all about. And verse 15, she says, the mother says to the son, but she said to, I'm sorry, I'm missing this. Rachel says to Leah, give me your son's mandrakes. That's what it is. Rachel, vatomer Rachel el Leah, tni nali miduda ebenech. I want those mandrakes. I need them more than you. Verse 15, she says, Leah, Hama'at kachtech et ishi. Isn't it enough you took my husband? Now you're going to also take my fertility? Rachel says, okay, it's a deal. I promise he will lie with you tonight. Trade me your mandrakes for a night with Jacob. Which means what? Jacob is usually sleeping in Rachel's tent. But now Rachel gets to trade him. I mean, who makes the decisions in the sexual relationships here? It's fascinating, right? He's going to sleep with you. You give me the mandrakes. And sure enough, verse 16, Jacob comes home at night. Leah goes out to greet him. And Leah tells him, you're sleeping here tonight because I hired you. I paid for you with mandrakes. Vayishkav ima balayla hu. He sleeps with her that night, and she conceives her fifth child. We're going to stop there. The dynamics. Oh yes, and thank you. The Torah eventually also outlaws marrying sisters. Thank you. The dynamics of the generosity between those sisters that started this relationship for whatever reason has completely fallen away. They're each in it for themselves. Rachel wants children. Leah wants love. And it never really ends. The end of the baby wars, as I like to call it, is that Rachel does finally have her own children. Yosef is named Yosef because it means to add. Yosef li ben acher, like, okay, now I want another one. Please give me another son and another son. And Binyamin, she dies tragically in childbirth with Binyamin, is called Binyamin because she says, Ben Oni, son of my affliction. And at that moment, by the way, it's like the first time Jacob has a say. He hasn't named any of his children. He finally puts his foot down and says, no, enough. We are not naming this son after the tragedy and the pain of his mother, who had never conceived and then finally conceived and now dies in childbirth, and his Binyamini, son of my right hand, son of strength. Binyamin, actually, Jacob finally has the last word and gets to name Binyamin. So I'm curious about any of your thoughts about the way that sisters are either cooperative or competitive. Sisters are controlling the men. Well, not at the beginning with Lavan. The father is controlling the marriage, but then in the relationship, the sisters are controlling the relationship. And before we go today, I'm going to play you actually the one more song at the end where Angelica stands up again for her sister. We're going to hear that in another couple of moments. But for now, you can raise your hand or put into the chat whatever your reflections or thoughts might be. I see Pepita has a hand, and just raise your hand if you'd also like to chime in. Go ahead, Pepita. Tell me what you're thinking.
I just find it so interesting that the only good bit of the relationship between Leah and Rachel happens in a midrash and not in the Torah.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. I meant to bring that up. Rachel and Leah's relationship in the Torah shebichtav, as we call it, the written law, the written Torah, is never redeemed. It's irredeemable. And this midrash, I feel this midrash is mostly motivated by the total unbelievable nature of the story otherwise. Would you say so? I don't know if you would feel that way.
I don't know if there's a feeling of really feeling sorry for the situation, and then maybe that explains why eventually the Torah made it impossible to marry sisters, and it tries to give a better spin on it. But otherwise, it's just a horrible story of deception.
Right.
And it does serve Jacob right. I mean, I never liked Jacob in the first place because of what he did when he was younger. So serves him right.
Yes, it serves him right. You're
gives
saying,
him
just to
spin.
articulate what you mean there, it serves him right because he tricked his brother.
Exactly. So he gets what he deserves. But the fact that it gives it a spin and gives kindness to Rachel is really very lovely.
Yeah.
But it's not in the text.
It's not in the plain sense of the text. And I think that is important. You know, in the traditional Jewish educational framework, I know I learned this way, and my children come home now learning this way. Like, they come home and just tell the story. This is the story. You know, they might say, we learned when they came to Sinai, like, God was looking at all the different mountains, and God chose the shortest mountain, God chose Sinai, and then God gave the Torah in Sinai. And I would say, really, is that in the Torah? That story is not in the Torah text, it's in the Midrash. And that's okay. But the reason that is significant is because the Torah text is a couple thousand years older than, or I mean, if there's an academic in the room, we could quibble with exactly when the text was solidified and codified. But the Midrash is a rabbinic document and a rabbinic interpretation of that text. and it's pedagogical in nature. The rabbis are trying to teach a lesson. So I know I say this all the time in my classes because it stuck with me when a teacher said it to me. When we study a midrash, and we study a midrash like this with Rachel and Leah, the question to ask is not, is it true? Is that how it really happened? Did Rachel give the signs to Leah? Was she really that kind to her sister? The question to ask of a midrash is, what is this trying to teach? What is the lesson that rabbis are trying to teach, in the early rabbinic period? And by the way, that's still 2,000 years ago. That's still, the midrash is an ancient text. And perhaps in this case, they want to show, the trope throughout the Torah, am I my brother's keeper? The failure of Cain and Abel needs to have a tikkun, needs to have a rectification. That yes, we need to look out for our brother and for our sister, not only literally our brother or our sister, but eventually, of course, all of the Jewish people. And it doesn't get to be rectified really until the 12 tribes, the 12 brothers, right? That story with Joseph, and they're standing up for their brother, and they are their brother's keeper. And that's Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' sort of summary of the sibling rivalry in Bereishit, that it gets resolved finally with those brothers. So the rabbis are pained by the betrayal of Rachel and Leah to Leah back and forth again and again. So there's a little glimmer of hope in this midrash. Anita, go ahead.
We just finished, well, we're not finished, but we were just looking at this text in my Torah class yesterday. So this happens to be fresh in my head.
Great.
There's this sense that, well, there were a couple of things that Rebecca, when she struggled with her pregnancy, she was still seeing God as the source of the fertility. Like everybody else sees God as the source, like Leah sees God as the source of the fertility. Rachel, when she is struggling with barrenness, she immediately turns on Jacob. She does not see that God is the source of children,
right?
That Jacob is the source of children, and that's really. And I was thinking as you were playing this, and as I was thinking about this, she was the loved one. It doesn't mean that Leah wasn't loved. She just wasn't as loved as Rachel was.
Mm-hmm.
But being loved wasn't enough. Love in this story wasn't enough. It's not enough to be the loved one.
Well, and especially, not only in that era, but also in the biblical context of covenant and brit and children and continuity. Like, what am I if I can't really be part of the continuity of this nation?
Right.
This nation of Abraham.
And then there was this other comment. I'll just throw this out there that, Jacob makes his name and his living by animal husbandry, 1 ram and a lot of ewes. And so there's
a ewe is Rachel, actually. That's what I'm laughing at.
Exactly. That's what her name.
Little lamb is a Rachel.
Right. So I'm just thinking about how he continues this husbandry, in terms of building the flock,
Thank you. It's very creative. And I want to give a nod to the comment in the chat. Thank you, Eileen, that this is very much this competition between siblings about children and so on can still be a modern story. And thank you also, Esther, for that comment. Leah is buried with Jacob because Rachel dies on the road, suddenly, and she has Kever Rachel, a very special designated place. She's no less a matriarch, but she takes on a different role, right? She takes on the ima, the mama, like the mother crying for her children. And that really is later in the prophets, in the way that the Rachel character is on the path, sort of watching the people of Israel going into exile, crying for her children. So, but again, the motherhood of Rachel takes precedence because it's what she longed for so deeply. Bunny, and then we're going to go to our final song. So you're going to have a last comment.
So just as a fast question, is it known whether Leah knew all along for the 7 years that he was toiling for Rachel, that she was going to be substituted?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. The text is not telling us that. I haven't seen commentary on that.
But that's your midrash. You could make that.
That could be exactly. Well,
we could do a new midrash.
That it to life. What were those 7 years like?
Exactly.
My sense, the thing we are told, let's just flesh this out. The thing we are told is that those years passed like the blink of an eye because Jacob knew that he was going to marry Rachel. So Jacob certainly didn't know.
No.
But
I'm not asking
Leah and
about Jacob,
Rachel,
I'm asking about Leah.
No, Leah and Rachel certainly have an inkling about it because of that whole signs exchange. But at what point do they realize that that's what's going to happen? Was it just the day before, or was it all the 7 years? And that's up for interpretation. And remember, when we say a modern midrash, any midrash or you don't have to use that word midrash. You can use the word any personal interpretation is fine as long as it can be supported by the text. So I think it can be. And it could go either way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to just move us toward ending, and we're going to end with the conflict at the end of the musical. I'm trying to summarize this very quickly in terms of the plot. The significance of it is that Alexander betrays Eliza. Alexander cheats on Eliza, while Eliza and her sister Angelica, who had been visiting from England, she eventually marries and moves to England. They're up in the country, and there's a whole story of this man whose last name is Reynolds, and Alexander sleeps with Reynolds' wife, and this scandal is uncovered not because he slept with the wife of a married woman, but because there was an exchange of money, and there's fear that there was bribery or that Alexander was using treasury funds or government funds, and Alexander wants to clear his name, that actually financially this was all above board, and what's more, the guy knew that I was sleeping with his wife, and he had me pay him off for this. So the story unfolds where Alexander wants to clear his name, saying, I guess I did commit adultery, but I did nothing else wrong. If that sounds. And he wants to clear his name by saying the man knew, it was all in the open. And he does that in something he calls the Reynolds pamphlet. So the Reynolds pamphlet is the song where people are reading this and saying, can you believe he wrote this and published it? And that's how Eliza finds out that Alexander cheated on her. So what's wonderful in this song is that we get to hear Angelica come back. And as many musicals do, a musical motif will return, the same song or the same character will sing a certain tune. And so you're going to hear the same sort of satisfied coming back, and Angelica shows up from England because of this conflict with Eliza and with Alexander, and she walks in, and Alexander says, oh, thank goodness you're here, Angelica, someone who understands me. And she says in this very biting, icy tone, I'm not here for you, I'm here for my sister. And that's where it really shines differently, right? Rachel and Leah are always in competition. Angelica may have given up the love of her life, but she'll never betray her sister, not even for Alexander. I will say there's a little bit of coarse language in this one. There's a little bit of also, it's even more sort of that rap sound. So culturally, that's what the musical is. And we don't have a video, we're just gonna listen. Again, the piece is called The Reynolds Pamphlet. And everyone's saying, did you read this? Can you believe it? Did you read this? And then in comes Angelica to her sister's side once again. And we'll end on this. Here we go. It's not too long.
The Reynolds Pamphlet. Have you read this? Alexander Hamilton had a torrid affair, and he wrote it down right there. Highlights!
The charge against me is a connection with one James Reynolds for purposes of improper speculation. My real crime is an amorous connection with his wife for a considerable time with his knowing consent.
Damn!
I had frequent meetings with her, most of them at my own house.
At his own house? At his own house.
Mrs. Hamilton with our children being absent on a visit to her father.
No.
president now. Never gonna be 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 president now. That's one less thing to worry about. That's one less thing to worry about.
I came as soon as I heard.
Angelica,
All the way from London. Damn.
Angelica, thank God someone who understands what I'm struggling here to do.
I'm not here for you. I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. I love my sister more than anything in this life. I will choose her happiness over mine every time. Put what we had aside. I'm standing at her side. You can never be satisfied. God, I hope you're satisfied.
Never gonna be president now. 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 One less thing to worry about. That's one less thing to worry about. Hey, and it's suicide just with the money.
Okay. I'm going to stop it there. The never going to be president now, I didn't quite explain, but it's Jefferson who's his rival, realizing that, okay, this scandal is out. We don't have to worry about Hamilton. He's never going to be president. But isn't that amazing? You hear Angelica saying, I will choose my sister's happiness over mine every time. I'm sorry, I have to go. I have another meeting and I know we're at the end of our hour. There's so much more to say. We'll be revisiting with Hamilton next week. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.